Your day may be over, and yet a part of you is still working. You sit down, turn off the lights, or try to rest, but your mind remains alert to everything that might still need your attention. You remember that message you still haven't answered. You think about what you'll have to deal with tomorrow. You replay a conversation from work. You remember something one of your children needs, an errand you can't forget, a bill, a phone call, a decision that is still unresolved. And even though there is practically nothing you can do about many of those things right now, they remain active inside you as if they were urgent matters. Your body has reached the end of the day. Your sense of responsibility, however, seems not to have gotten the message. That state can easily be mistaken for being a responsible person. It seems reasonable to think that if something matters, we should keep it in mind. That if we stop thinking about it, we might be neglecting it. That relaxing too much could cause us to overlook some obligation. But it is worth making an important distinction from the very beginning. Keeping a problem on your mind does not always mean you are actually dealing with it. Some matters require action. Others, at this moment, are simply taking up your attention. Learning to tell the difference can completely change the way you end your day. Because a worry can feel productive, even when it produces no decision at all. You can go over tomorrow's situation 20 times and end up in exactly the same place. You can reconstruct a conversation again and again without discovering anything new. You can imagine possible family, financial, or work problems and feel as though you are preparing yourself, when in reality, you are simply remaining mentally available for events that have not happened yet. And the cost does not appear only when you go to bed. Sometimes it starts much earlier. Maybe you get home and keep checking your phone, even though there is no emergency. You are eating dinner, but part of your attention is still on a task that was left unfinished. Someone is talking to you, and you are only half listening because you are mentally organizing the next day. You sit down for a few minutes, and instead of resting, you begin remembering everything that is still left to do. Not necessarily because you want to. You have simply learned never to fully shut things down. And when that way of living continues for a long time, rest stops depending only on whether you have free time. You can have an entire hour with no obligations and still not feel truly free during that hour. You can be lying on the couch while still working internally. You can turn off your computer and continue responding to imaginary conversations. You can get into bed and begin a second workday made entirely of thoughts. That is why it is worth looking closely at what it really means to remain on guard. A person who is on call does not need to be taking action constantly. It is enough for them to remain ready to act. Their attention never completely withdraws. Some part of them is still listening in case something happens. Something similar can happen at the end of the day when we feel that we have to be prepared for any possible need. A message, a difficulty, tomorrow's problem, a family request, a forgotten task. Even when there is no real emergency, the feeling remains that we cannot completely disconnect. And that feeling can exist for perfectly understandable reasons. Responsibilities do not disappear simply because night has arrived. Having children, caring for someone, running a business, going through a difficult period, or supporting a family involves things that genuinely matter. It would make no sense to pretend those things do not exist. The problem begins when we treat everything that matters as though it matters right now. That difference may seem small, but it is decisive. There are real problems you cannot act on at 11 o'clock at night. There are conversations that will have to wait until tomorrow. There are decisions that require information you do not have yet. There are tasks you have already written down. There are possibilities you do not even know will happen. Keeping all of those things active for hours does not necessarily increase your ability to handle them. Sometimes it only ensures that you arrive at them more exhausted. You can test this in a very simple way the next time you notice the same issue returning again and again while you are trying to rest. You do not need to fight the thought. You do not need to force your mind to go blank. Simply ask yourself what that issue is actually asking of you right now. Not what it might require tomorrow. Not what you are afraid could happen. Not everything that would ideally be resolved. What specific action does this require from me right now? Maybe there is one. Perhaps you forgot to send something important and you can still send it. Maybe you need to prepare a document, set an alarm, or write something down so you do not have to depend on your memory. In that case, there is a concrete action available. But very often, you will discover something different. There is no action available. There is only an open worry. And recognizing that does not automatically make the worry disappear. Nor should it. The goal is not to become someone who is indifferent to their responsibilities. The goal is to stop treating a real obligation and an imagined possibility as though they deserve exactly the same response. When a worry has no possible action attached to it in the present moment, continuing to think about it can create a strange feeling of control. As long as the issue remains inside your head, it feels as though you have not abandoned it. That is why some people mentally return to the same subjects, even after they have already made a decision. They sent the message, but they keep reviewing how they wrote it. They prepared everything needed for tomorrow, but they continue imagining what could go wrong. They had the difficult conversation, but they keep rehearsing responses for a second conversation that may never happen. The task is finished. The vigilance continues. In those moments, it can be useful to pay attention not only to what you are thinking, but to what you do after the thought appears. Maybe you pick up your phone again. Maybe you reopen your email. Maybe you review a list you already know by heart. Maybe you jump from one issue to another until 5 worries have appeared where there was originally only one. That is when the pattern begins to reveal itself more clearly. It is not simply that you have a lot of thoughts. It is that you respond to every thought as though it immediately deserves more attention. A worry appears and you follow it. Another appears and you follow that one too. You remember something and you check it. You imagine a possibility and you begin mentally preparing for it. Little by little, your own attention begins communicating a message. All of this needs to be watched. And the more often that response is repeated, the more natural it becomes to keep doing it. That is why trying to rest by simply telling yourself, "I shouldn't be thinking about this," usually does not help much. It adds another obligation to everything that is already present. Now, in addition to solving your problems, you also seem to have the responsibility of somehow succeeding at not thinking. It is more useful to introduce judgment. A responsibility can exist without needing to remain active every minute. You can take something seriously and stop looking at it for a few hours. You can love someone without anticipating every problem they might face. You can care about tomorrow without trying to live tomorrow tonight. You can do your job responsibly without allowing every unfinished matter to occupy the same amount of attention after the workday has ended. This is not carelessness. It is the deliberate distribution of attention. And perhaps this is one of the hardest distinctions to learn when, for years, you have been the person who remembers, solves, organizes, or responds. We become so accustomed to carrying things that temporarily setting one of them down can actually feel uncomfortable, as though something might slip away precisely because we have stopped watching it. But it is worth asking yourself one thing: how much of what you are keeping open tonight truly requires your presence tonight? You do not have to answer everything all at once. Just observe. When the next worry appears, notice what it does to you. Does it immediately send you toward your phone? Does it make you replay a conversation? Does it begin constructing scenarios? Does it turn something that belongs to tomorrow into an emergency tonight? That moment already contains useful information. Because before you can learn to rest differently, you need to recognize the exact moment when you stop dealing with a responsibility and begin watching over it. At first, there may seem to be no difference between the two, but there is. And within that difference, a small amount of space begins to appear. The possibility of deciding what deserves action now and what can, for a few hours, exist without your constant supervision. That small amount of space does not appear because your problems have disappeared. It appears when you stop reacting to every worry as though it carries the same level of urgency. It is one thing to recognize that tomorrow you will have to deal with something. It is something entirely different to spend the night rehearsing every possible way it could become complicated. Sometimes the difference between those two states is difficult to notice at first. The thought may begin reasonably enough. Tomorrow, I need to talk to this person. But within seconds, you are already imagining what they will say, what tone they will use, what you will do if they become upset, what will happen if the conversation goes badly, and what consequences it might have a week from now. The original fact was small and concrete. Your interpretation built an entire scenario around it. That does not mean we should ignore possible consequences. Anticipation is part of adult life. We make plans. We prevent mistakes. We think before we act. The problem begins when anticipation stops producing decisions and starts merely keeping us alert. There is a simple question that can help separate the two. Am I thinking because I need to make a decision? Or am I thinking because I still cannot tolerate leaving this unresolved? You do not need to answer perfectly. Simply notice what is happening. Because many nighttime worries share one particular characteristic. They are searching for certainty that is not available at that moment. You want to know whether tomorrow's meeting will go well, whether that person will understand what you are trying to tell them, whether the financial problem will be resolved, whether someone in your family will be okay, whether a decision you made was the right one, whether something that does not fully depend on you will turn out the way you want. And when certainty is unavailable, the mind tries to manufacture it through repetition. Go over it again. Imagine another possibility. Check one more time. Search for a new answer inside a problem that still contains exactly the same information. At that point, it is useful to return to a simple idea. A responsibility can depend partly on you, without depending entirely on you. Maybe tomorrow it is your responsibility to prepare well for a conversation. That part depends on you. The other person's exact reaction does not. Maybe you can review your finances, organize documents, or ask for information. You cannot guarantee tonight how a situation will develop several months from now. Maybe you can support someone close to you, be available when necessary, and make reasonable decisions. You cannot prevent in advance every difficulty that person may experience. The difficulty is that accepting these limits can initially feel like giving up control. When you have spent a long time carrying many responsibilities, thinking more can feel like a way of protecting yourself. Keeping every issue present creates the impression that nothing will catch you off guard. But being prepared does not mean remaining permanently activated. You can prepare something and then put it down. You can remember an obligation without reviewing it 50 times. You can care for someone without mentally monitoring every possible outcome. You can do your part and recognize that the final result does not exist yet. This distinction is deeply practical because it allows each issue to return to its actual size. Imagine that you sent an important email late in the afternoon. At 10 o'clock that night, you remember it. Your first reaction might be to open it again. You reread one sentence. You wonder whether it could have been misunderstood. You check to see whether there is a reply. There is not. 5 minutes later, you check again. What changed between the first check and the second? Probably nothing. The fact remains exactly the same. The message has been sent, and there is still no response. Everything else is happening inside your interpretation. That does not make the thought ridiculous. The issue may matter a great deal. That is precisely why it attracts your attention. But importance and the availability of action are two different things. Some important matters have to wait, and learning to allow them to wait is part of self-mastery. We cannot always choose which thought appears, but we can begin choosing how long we continue feeding it after we have already determined that there is no useful action available. One way to do that is to reduce the problem to a simple, concrete sentence. Not tomorrow everything could go wrong, but tomorrow I have a difficult conversation. Not I have to figure out my entire professional future tonight. But I need to review 2 options and make a decision before Friday. Not I have to stay worried about everyone. But tomorrow I need to call this person and see how they are doing. When language becomes more precise, the problem often regains its boundaries. Worry tends to expand. Precision tends to contain it. And there is another element worth paying attention to. Your body can continue carrying the feeling of urgency even when, rationally, you know there is nothing to do. Sometimes you put down your phone, turn off the light, and still feel tense. Your chest remains slightly tight. Your jaw does not completely relax. Your breathing stays fast. Your body seems prepared for an action that never arrives. In that state, spending half an hour trying to reason yourself into calm may not help very much. It may be more useful to lower the pace first, not as some extraordinary technique, simply as a physical signal that, at this moment, you do not have to respond. Breathe a little more slowly. Put the phone out of your hand. Sit without adding another task. Wait a few seconds before following the next thought. These are small gestures, but they create an interruption. And inside that interruption, an important question appears. Does this need my action or only my attention? Sometimes it will need both. If a family member calls with a real problem, you act. If a genuine work emergency appears that truly cannot wait, you respond. If you forgot something important and you still have time to correct it, you do what needs to be done. The idea is not to become rigid and decide that nothing deserves your attention after a certain hour. The idea is to stop treating every possibility as an emergency in advance. Because a reasonable objection may appear. If I stop thinking about my problems, am I simply avoiding what I need to do? Sometimes, yes. Some people use rest as an excuse to postpone uncomfortable decisions. But that pattern is easy to recognize because the behavior continues the next day. The issue never gets its proper moment. What we are talking about here is different. Doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done, and then stopping the mental work when no useful action remains. Avoidance would be refusing to open that email tomorrow. Rest is choosing not to open it 5 times tonight when there is nothing you can do about it. Avoidance would be refusing for weeks to have a necessary conversation. Rest is recognizing that at midnight you are not going to solve it any better by imagining every possible outcome. The difference lies in whether there is a specific time when you will return to the issue. That creates enormous clarity. When a worry appears, you can decide, tomorrow at 9, I will look at this. Then, if necessary, write it down. Not to force the thought out of your mind, but to give it a place. Many worries stay open because they have no defined place. They simply float around inside your attention, carrying a vague instruction. Don't forget this. When there is a next action and an approximate time to take it, you no longer need to use vigilance as your reminder system. And even then, the thought may come back. That is important to accept. Deciding that something can wait does not mean your mind will immediately obey. It may return 5 minutes later. You do not need to argue with it. You can simply recognize the situation again. This is already written down. There is no new action. I will return to it tomorrow, and then return to whatever you were doing. You may need to repeat this several times. The change does not consist of making the worry never return. The change consists of refusing to hold a new meeting with it every single time it appears. That is when your relationship with your responsibilities begins to change. You no longer need to keep all of them present to prove that they matter to you. You can begin trusting your decisions a little more. Your notes, your schedule, your ability to return to something when the appropriate moment arrives. And above all, you can begin noticing something that may have been hidden beneath your exhaustion for a long time. Resting is not abandoning your obligations. It is stopping the unnecessary expenditure of energy on them when there is still nothing useful you can do. Understanding this helps, but understanding it for one night does not automatically change years of constant vigilance. The real change begins when this distinction becomes a repeated behavior, especially during those small moments when your mind tries to put itself back on guard. That change begins in moments that are much less dramatic than you might imagine. Not when you have finally managed to solve your entire life, but when a familiar worry arrives and you choose not to automatically open the door to another half hour of vigilance. It can happen at the end of an ordinary workday. You have eaten dinner. You have prepared what you need for tomorrow. There is still a conversation pending at work, and you know it is going to be uncomfortable. Your usual habit would be to think about it again while cleaning the kitchen, then again while taking a shower, and once more after turning off the light. This time, you do something different. You check whether there is any useful action you can take right now. There is not. The conversation will happen tomorrow. So you write down one sentence containing whatever you do not want to forget, and you close the matter for the night. Maybe it comes back 10 minutes later, but now you already have an answer. You do not need to start from the beginning again. You do not need to convince yourself that everything will go well. You do not have to pretend you no longer care. You simply remember. This has a time, and that time is not now. That gesture may seem small, but it contains a different form of responsibility. You are no longer using your own tension as a system for remembering what matters. For a long time, we can become accustomed to believing that if we stop worrying, we will become less careful. But a person can be deeply responsible and still learn to temporarily close unresolved matters. In fact, that ability can improve the way they return to those matters later. Because there is a difference between facing a decision after hours of mental vigilance and facing it after allowing yourself to recover some distance. Some problems become larger simply because we stare at them for too long when we are unable to act. Not because they are unimportant, but because eventually, looking stops producing new information. Consider a different situation. A family member is going through a difficult period. You want to help. You have spoken with that person. You have done what was within your power. And yet you find yourself constantly checking your phone in case a message arrives. Every period of silence begins producing an interpretation. Maybe something happened. Maybe they need help. Maybe I should call again. In that situation, stepping away from vigilance does not mean caring less about that person. It may mean deciding which signals would genuinely justify taking action and which ones would not. If there is a specific reason to call, then call. If there is not, and you have already spoken, allow a few hours to pass without turning silence into an emergency. That is also a form of caring with judgment, because responsibility without limits can eventually create a strange kind of presence. You are available to everyone, but never completely present anywhere. While you are talking to one person, you are thinking about another. While you are resting, you are thinking about work. While you are working, you are afraid you might forget something at home. While you are at home, you are mentally reviewing what was left unfinished somewhere else. You do not need some dramatic collapse to notice the cost. You only need to observe how many ordinary moments are occupied by something that is not actually happening there. So the change is not simply about sleeping better at night. It is about recovering your ability to be where you actually are. And that requires concrete decisions. One of them may be creating a recognizable ending to your day. It does not need to become some elaborate ritual. In fact, the more complicated it is, the less likely you are to maintain it. It can be as simple as reviewing what is still unfinished, deciding on the next action for each important issue, and writing those actions down. What matters is not the notebook, the phone, or the format. What matters is communicating something clearly to yourself. I do not need to keep remembering this through worry. Tomorrow, there will be a place for it. Another decision appears when a new issue arrives outside your normal hours. Imagine that late at night, an email appears. It is not urgent, but it immediately creates the impulse to respond. In the past, you might have opened it, replied, and then spent another hour thinking about the subject. Now you can look at the situation through a different question. Does answering this right now actually improve anything? If the answer is no, leaving it until tomorrow is not negligence. It is placing a time boundary around your availability. At first, that can feel uncomfortable. You may feel that you should respond because you have already seen the message, or because waiting might appear unprofessional, or simply because you want to get the matter off your plate. But sometimes getting something off your plate at 10:30 at night means placing it directly inside your rest. Everyone's circumstances are different. Some jobs have unpredictable hours. Some caregiving responsibilities do not allow complete disconnection. And there are seasons in life when greater availability is genuinely necessary. That is why a rigid rule such as never respond after a certain hour is not particularly useful. The principle is different. Do not keep yourself available when nobody has asked you to be available and the situation does not require it. The same principle can be applied to problems that do not yet exist. Maybe tomorrow you are waiting for important news. Perhaps you have an appointment, a meeting, a result, a conversation. The night before, your mind can offer you dozens of possible futures. Some good, others unpleasant. The temptation is to walk through every one of them, as though imagining enough scenarios could somehow reduce the uncertainty. But beyond a certain point, you are no longer preparing. You are trying to live in advance something that has not happened yet. At that point, the behavioral change can be very simple. Return to the next action that actually depends on you. If you need to prepare documents, prepare them. If you need sleep in order to think clearly tomorrow, protect that possibility. If you have already done everything necessary, leave the result where it currently belongs, outside your control for now. You do not need to feel perfectly calm in order to do this. That part matters. There will be nights when deciding that something can wait does not create immediate relief. Your body remains restless. The worry returns. You might even find yourself checking your phone again after deciding that you would not. That does not make the effort pointless. Self-mastery rarely looks like perfect obedience to your first decision. It looks more like noticing sooner, interrupting the pattern a little sooner, returning one more time. If yesterday you spent an hour going over something, and today you recognize the pattern after 20 minutes, there is already a difference. If you once responded automatically to every message, and now some messages can wait, there is a difference. If the worry still appears but you no longer need to follow every branch of it, there is a difference. With repetition, this new response can become more accessible, not because your responsibilities disappear, but because you stop using vigilance as proof that you are responsible. And perhaps this is one of the most important ideas for anyone who has spent years being the person who solves, remembers, supports, or anticipates. Not everything has to remain inside you in order to be properly cared for. A task can be written down. A conversation can wait. A problem can have a scheduled time. Someone else can take responsibility for something. A possibility can remain uncertain without requiring you to examine it tonight. There comes a point when continued thinking stops being preparation and begins becoming exhaustion. Learning to recognize that moment does not make you indifferent. It allows you to preserve your resources for the moment when they are actually needed. At the end of the day, you may get into bed and once again notice the thing you have been trying for hours to set aside. Tomorrow, there is too much to do. That conversation is still pending. You do not know how a certain problem will develop. Someone you love is going through a difficult situation. All of those things may still be true. You do not have to deny any of them in order to rest. You can acknowledge them and at the same time, ask yourself one final time, is there anything reasonable I need to do about this right now? If there is, do it. If there is not, allow the night to simply be the night. You do not need to solve tomorrow before you are allowed to sleep tonight. Responsibility has moments for action and moments for waiting. When you begin to distinguish between them, rest stops feeling like abandonment. It becomes a reasonable part of the same life you are trying to take care of. There may still be nights when your mind puts itself back on guard. But now you can recognize what is happening. You can notice when a worry is asking for action and when it is only asking for one more round of thought. You can write down what needs to be remembered. Put down the phone. Postpone a decision until you have the information you need. And return to the place where you actually are. The day does not have to be perfectly resolved before it is allowed to end. Sometimes it is enough to have done what was yours to do and accept that everything else will have its proper moment. Your body should not be the only part of you that receives permission to rest. Your attention can also learn that not everything needs to be watched tonight. If this reflection could help someone you know, share it with them. This is Stoic spirit,